This happened to me in 2017. I was driving cross-country from Denver to Portland. My best friend had just moved up there, and I was helping her move in, driving a U-Haul packed with all her stuff. It was a long, exhausting drive, and somewhere deep into Idaho, I decided I couldn't push through anymore. My legs were stiff, my eyes were heavy, and I knew I had to stop. I spotted a blue highway sign advertising a rest area about 5 miles ahead. It was nearly 2:45 in the morning, and I hadn't seen another car for what felt like an hour. The road was empty, swallowed up by dark pine trees on either side. I almost kept going. Something about that night felt off, but exhaustion won. I figured I'd be quick, just stretch my legs and use the bathroom. When I pulled into the rest stop, it was completely deserted. No other vehicles, not even a semi-truck or a lonely car sleeping in the corner of the lot. The only light came from a single fluorescent bulb above the restroom building, flickering weakly, like it could go out any second. The surrounding woods pressed right up to the edges of the parking lot, and I couldn't help but feel like the trees were watching me. I told myself I was being dramatic. I grabbed my jacket, locked the truck behind me, and headed toward the building. The wind was cold and sharp, and every footstep on the gravel sounded way too loud. Inside, the restroom was surprisingly clean. Cold tile floors, 2 stalls, and a wide mirror stretched over a row of sinks. The smell of bleach hung heavy in the air. It should have been comforting, but it wasn't. It smelled too fresh, like someone had just been there. I hurried into the nearest stall, did my business, and came out to wash my hands. As I stood at the sink scrubbing my hands, I glanced up and froze. In the mirror, there was someone standing directly behind me. A man, tall, thin, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up. His skin looked pale under the fluorescent light, almost gray, and his eyes were deep set, shadowed in a way that made it impossible to tell exactly where he was looking. His mouth was slightly open, and I could almost hear the faintest rasp of breathing. I spun around so fast, I almost slipped. The bathroom behind me was empty. I stared into the emptiness, heart hammering against my ribs. I looked under the stalls. No feet. Listened. No breathing. No movement. Shaking. I turned back to the mirror. Nothing now, just my own reflection, wide-eyed and pale. I told myself it was exhaustion. Lack of sleep plays tricks on your mind, right? I dried my hands on my jeans. No way was I hanging around, and made for the door. It wouldn't open. At first, I thought maybe it was just stuck, so I pulled harder. I shoved against it with my shoulder. Nothing. It felt like it was being held shut from the outside, unmoving, no matter how much I fought it. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps crossing the tiles behind me. I spun around again, expecting to catch whoever it was, but there was still nothing there. Only the sound of those footsteps, pacing, circling me. The air grew heavier, thicker, and it got harder to breathe. I backed up until I was pressed against the door, my palms slick with sweat. I squeezed my eyes shut, listening to the footsteps come closer. Then the light above me buzzed violently and exploded in a pop of glass, sending shards raining down. I ducked and covered my head, heart racing, and when I looked up again, I saw him standing in the open doorway of the farthest stall, still, silent, staring, his head tilted slightly to one side, like he was studying me, waiting for something. My legs moved before my brain could. I tried to run, but the floor was slick from the burst light fixture, and my foot slid out from under me. I crashed onto the cold tiles. The wind knocked from my lungs. Pain shot through my side. I scrambled to get up, gasping, but when I looked toward the stall, he was gone again. Gone. But I wasn't alone. I could still feel him. This crushing sense of something just out of sight. And then, without warning, the heavy door behind me creaked open, just a few inches. I didn't think. I bolted. I sprinted through that opening, like hell itself was on my heels. I didn't even look back. I dove into the U-Haul, locked the doors, and tore out of that rest stop. So fast I left dust clouds swirling in my rearview mirror. It wasn't until I was a good 10 miles down the road that I allowed myself to breathe again. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely keep them on the wheel. I didn't stop driving until the sun rose. Later that day, I pulled into a small diner on the edge of Oregon, trying to calm myself down with some real food and coffee. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, came over to take my order. Trying to make conversation, I asked her if she knew anything about that rest stop back in Idaho, off exit 192. Her face went pale immediately. "You stopped there?" she asked, voice low. I nodded and told her a bit of what had happened. I could tell she wasn't surprised. "There's been stories about that place for years," she said quietly. "Back in the early 90s, a man, he took his own life in that restroom. They found him hanging in the last stall. Ever since, folks say they see things, hear things. Some even say he tries to follow them home." She gave me a serious look and added, "You should burn the clothes you wore that night, just in case." I laughed it off at the time, thought it was just local superstition. But that night, when I finally made it to Portland and settled into my friend's apartment, I unpacked my bag and froze. My jacket, the one I wore into the restroom, was soaking wet. It reeked of mildew and something else, something sour and rotten. I hadn't gone near water. I hadn't spilled anything, but there it was, heavy and damp in my hands, like it had been dragged through a swamp. I didn't even think. I took it outside and threw it in the dumpster down the street. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe it was just the exhaustion. But to this day, when I drive at night and I pass one of those lonely, deserted rest stops on the highway, I feel that cold creeping dread at the back of my neck. And I keep on driving, because some places are better left undisturbed. Back in 2021, I lived in an old apartment building in the Edgewater neighborhood of Chicago. If you know the area, you know it's a mix of vintage charm and quiet eeriness. My building was one of those aging brick complexes with cracked stone steps, creaky floorboards, and narrow hallways that always smelled faintly of old carpet and radiator steam. It had character, sure, but also a kind of faded gloom that settled into your bones after a while. Still, the rent was cheap, and the landlord pretty much left everyone alone, so I had no complaints, at least, not at first. I lived on the 3rd floor, in Unit 3B. The place was basic, 1 bedroom, tiny kitchen, low water pressure, and windows that whistled when the wind picked up off the lake. The floors groaned whenever you walked too fast, but I liked it. It felt like mine. Quiet, predictable. That changed after about 5 months, right around late October. One night, just after 2 a.m., I was reading in bed when I heard this deep scraping sound from below me, like someone was dragging a heavy couch across the floor. It went on for maybe a minute, then stopped. At first, I figured someone new had moved into the apartment below me and was rearranging furniture. It was late, but hey, it's Chicago. People work odd hours, but the sound came again the next night, and the night after that, always at almost the exact same time, between 2 and 2:30 in the morning. Long, slow dragging, then nothing. Then weirdly, a humming sound, not music, but a low frequency, almost like the hum of an old machine, or a deep voice resonating through a vent. I could feel it in my chest, like it was vibrating the floorboards. Curious, I asked my landlord a few days later if someone had moved into the 2nd floor unit directly beneath mine, 2B. He gave me this weird look and said, "No, that apartment's still vacant. hasn't been touched since April. I thought he was joking, but when I told him about the noises, he went quiet for a moment, then brushed it off, said it was probably the plumbing or the heating system echoing through the building. These old places carry sound weird, he told me. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But over the next 2 weeks, things escalated. When I'd walk down the stairs to check my mail in the lobby, I'd pass the door to 2B. A few times, I swear I heard whispering coming from inside, just beyond the door. Words I couldn't quite make out, like they were being spoken through cupped hands or behind glass. One night, I saw shadows moving under the door, human-shaped, pacing slowly from one side to the other. I finally knocked on the door one evening, more out of frustration than anything else. I wanted to see who was inside and ask them politely to keep it down. No one answered, no sounds, nothing. The next morning, I woke up to a yellow piece of paper slid under my door. No envelope, no signature, just a torn sheet of legal pad paper with 5 words scribbled in black ink. Stop knocking, you'll let it out. I stared at that note for a long time. I remember sitting on my couch, holding it with shaking hands. I didn't know what disturbed me more, that someone was in that apartment, watching me, or that they believed something needed to be kept in. I called the landlord again, and this time, he agreed to meet me and check the unit himself. We met that afternoon. He had a master key and opened the door right in front of me. The apartment was dark and completely empty. No furniture, no boxes, no signs of life. The air inside felt stale, like no one had breathed it in months. Dust clung to the floorboards, undisturbed. The kitchen cabinets were bare, not even cobwebs in the corners. I stood there in silence, and the landlord looked at me like I was crazy. See, no one's living here, he said, locking the door behind us. But that night, I heard the humming again, longer this time, and closer. That's when things got more personal. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by scratching, slow, deliberate, like fingernails dragging across wood. It was coming from beneath my bed. I live alone, and I don't have pets. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, crouched down, and looked underneath. There was nothing, just dust bunnies and an old sock. But just as I sat back on the bed, my phone buzzed in my hand. An airdrop request. I still remember the name on the screen. It just said 2B. The message, one word, move. My phone wasn't even set to accept requests from strangers. I shut it off immediately and sat up the rest of the night. Every light in the apartment, on, kitchen knife, on my nightstand. I didn't know if I was being threatened or warned. Either way, I wasn't sleeping. 3 nights later, I was brushing my teeth before bed when something caught my eye in the mirror. Behind me, in the vent on the far wall, just above the baseboard, I saw a face, not fully visible, just eyes, wide, glassy, unblinking, watching. I spun around so fast I nearly slipped, toothpaste still in my mouth. The vent was empty, completely empty, but the image of those eyes burned into my brain. I can still see them when I close my eyes. That was it. I was done. I emailed my landlord the next day and said I was breaking the lease. Didn't care about the fees, didn't care about the deposit. I packed everything I owned in 2 days and moved out without looking back. A month later, my old neighbor from across the hall messaged me on Instagram. She said someone new had moved into 3B, my old place. But get this, after just 2 weeks, they were already complaining about noises, strange sounds at night, humming, dragging, whispering, and one more thing. She said they mentioned seeing something in the mirror. I never replied. I didn't want to know more. Some nights, I still wonder what was in that second-floor apartment, and more importantly, if it ever really stayed there. This happened to me the summer I turned 19. I was staying with my aunt and uncle in rural Minnesota. not far from the Canadian border. My parents had gone through a rough divorce that year, and I just needed to get away. Their house sat on the edge of a big, quiet lake, no neighbors for miles, and just thick pine forest all around. The lake was beautiful during the day. Deep blue water, clean air, and the kind of stillness you only get out in the middle of nowhere. I'd spend most of my afternoons kayaking, reading, or just floating in the water. Nights were different though. The woods always felt like they were watching you, and the lake, well, it had a way of going dead silent. No frogs, no crickets, just nothing. It was during one of those silent nights that I first saw her. I was out on the dock around midnight, lying on my back, looking at the stars. The water was glass still, no wind, just the sound of my own breathing. Then I heard a splash, not far off, like someone jumping into the lake. I sat up, but didn't see anything at first. Then I spotted her, floating near the edge of the trees, maybe 30 feet from the dock. A girl, pale skin, long black hair that clung to her face. She was wearing a white dress that looked too heavy to be swimming in. She wasn't moving, just floating, half submerged. I shouted out, "Hey, are you okay?" No answer. I grabbed the flashlight and shined it at her, but she was gone. I figured maybe I imagined it. The mind can play tricks, especially in a place like that. But then it happened again. The next night, same time, same spot. This time she was closer. I could see her face, blank, expressionless, eyes wide open, and black as ink. She didn't blink. She didn't move. Then she slipped under the water, like a puppet being pulled by strings. I ran back to the house and told my uncle. He didn't laugh. He just got real quiet and said, "You don't go out on that dock after dark. You hear me? Not if you want to sleep sound." I pressed him for answers, but he wouldn't say more, just kept repeating, "It's not our business." I couldn't let it go. I started digging at the local library. I found an old article from 1979. A girl named Evelyn Parker had drowned in that lake. Exact same spot I'd seen her. She was 17, went missing during a bonfire party. Her friends said she went for a swim and never came back up. They found her body days later, near the dock, tangled in weeds, open eyes, mouth open like she was screaming. Thing is, the article said she had been pulled under. Her neck was bruised, like someone had grabbed her. And get this, there were rumors. People said it wasn't an accident, that someone at the party had pushed her, but no charges were filed. It was ruled an accident, and that was that. Until a year later, when one of the boys who was at that party drowned in the same lake, then another, both during summer, both alone. Locals started whispering that Evelyn never left, that she waited every summer to drag someone else down with her. I didn't want to believe it, but the third night sealed it for me. I woke up to wet footprints in the hallway. They led from the front door to my bedroom, and the door was still locked from the inside. There were bits of lake weed on the floor, damp hair stuck to the wood, and on my window drawn in the condensation were the words, "Come swim." I left that day, didn't say goodbye, didn't even pack everything. I just drove. My aunt called a few days later to ask if I was okay. I didn't tell her what I saw, but she said something before we hung up that still haunts me. She shows up every summer, she said. Sometimes she picks a new one. Sometimes she just watches. That dock's been torn down since, but I still dream about that lake. And sometimes in the quiet of night, I can hear the water lapping and feel those black eyes watching me, waiting for the next summer to come.